Hi. So my name is Sarah Kyambi. I'm the Director of Migration Policy Scotland. In just a couple of minutes, we will get started on this event. But I think we've probably got people coming in now. So I want to get started. Before we start on the actual report, I want to just take a few minutes to introduce you to Migration Policy Scotland and to this particular piece of work. Migration Policy Scotland was founded to offer a home for informed responses to the opportunities and challenges that migration brings. We are there to build capacity on the full spectrum of migration in Scotland. That includes the 90% of migrants who come for reasons other than asylum and to seek protection. And with migration set to grow for both demographic and economic needs, there was a growing need for migration to be integrated into mainstream.
Oh, no.
Sorry, I've just unmuted myself again. For migration to be integrated into mainstream economic and social policy, and to develop an evidence-led approach to migration. Developing the insight to make this possible it means doing the kinds of research that we'll be presenting today, which allows us to see what is actually going on with migrants, how they're interacting with different types of services, but also to provide opportunities for dialogue. And both this event and the planned policy lab will offer space for dialogue on the issues that migrants face and how that can be accommodated amongst service providers, policymakers, and other practitioners. This event is particularly timely this week, with it being Poverty Week, and announcements that migration numbers have increased coming out yesterday. But I want to first off give us special thanks to all the partners that we've had on this research project. It's a sizable piece of research that could not have been done without our partners, Grampian Regional Equality Council, Community Renewal Rom Romeha, and Together for Better Life. And within those organizations, I want to thank Maria Jose Pavez, Michelle Hayward, Delia Spatareanu, Marek Balog, Leon Pushka, Jamila Hassan, Wafa Mukta, and you'll be hearing from some of them today. To give some opening remarks about the scope and extent of the fieldwork, this research has covered the length and breadth of Scotland. We've heard from 60 migrants experiencing financial disadvantage, and 18 organizations, both mainstream and migrant focused, that offer services and support. Finally, before we head into the presentation on the research itself, I want to thank Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust for the funding that has made this work possible. I'll now hand over to Migration Policy Scotland's Associate Director, Rebecca Kay, who's been the lead partner on this research project.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I will just start my presentation. And say also again, welcome to everybody from me, and thanks everyone for coming. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yes, great, thanks. So as Sarah was just saying, this finding report comes at the midpoint of a 2-year research and policy project on financial disadvantage in migrant households. Over the first year of the project, we've gathered evidence on the financial challenges and precarity experienced by migrant households in Scotland. And with the launch of the report today, we're embarking on a process to advocate for and facilitate change in policy and practice. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so presenting some of our key findings and explaining how these have led us to identify specific areas for change. These feed into some immediate recommendations for government, employers and service providers, which we make in the report. And they also frame the process we're launching today and which will run over the coming year to explore and design initiatives to improve migrants' access to effective support and advice for employability and income maximisation. And I'll end today by outlining this process in a bit more detail. But first of all, some context. As you can see from the figures on the slide, Scotland's migrant population has grown significantly in the past 20 years, and this is likely to continue, and the figures out yesterday show that it is continuing and continuing significantly. This population is predominantly made up of younger people, both working age adults and a significant number of children, and it's a very significant part of Scotland's working age minority ethnic population, more so than in other parts of the UK. Working migrants are concentrated in areas of the workforce where wages are quite often low and contracts are less secure. In our project, we focused on the largest groups of working migrants in Scotland, those who have EU settled status or pre-settled status, those who are here on work or study visas and their dependents, and those who have indefinite leave to remain in the UK. We didn't look at the experiences of asylum seekers, nor people who've come to Scotland on humanitarian visa schemes from Ukraine or through other refugee resettlement programmes. It's worth pointing out that certainly not all migrants experience poverty, but many do, and many more are just managing to cope and at risk of poverty when things go wrong, or simply when things change. These experiences of poverty, both as an immediate issue and a risk just around the corner, are part of the bigger picture of poverty in Scotland. They're too often overlooked or treated as niche, when actually they're directly relevant to central poverty reduction targets and to indications of inequality regarding who is most vulnerable to poverty in Scotland. And yet, little attention has been paid in either analyses of poverty or proposed poverty solutions to the intersection between migration and the key drivers of poverty: high costs, barriers to increasing incomes, whether through employment or access to social security. Turning to our more specific findings, we found very clear evidence of hardship and vulnerability to poverty. Migrant households are clearly struggling to meet high living costs, and some of these struggles around rent, utility, and food bills are shared with other low-income households. However, in addition, migrant households face significant costs directly linked to immigration, which other households don't have to meet. These include fees to obtain and renew visas, as well as the immigration health surcharge, all of which have to be paid for each family member and at multiple points over a longer stay. So for a family of 4, these can amount to nearly £21,000 over the first 4 years after arrival. Keeping in touch with family abroad can also be costly and incurs significantly higher costs than for families that are mainly based within the same country. People can struggle or fall into debt to cover the costs of travel for funerals, for weddings, or when elderly relatives and other family members abroad fall ill or need help. On top of this, migrants can find themselves excluded from some of the strategies other households might use to lower costs. So, for example, not having a wider network of relatives nearby makes it harder to access informal childcare. Lack of familiarity with systems for managing utilities, council tax, and other bills make it harder to understand when or how to switch providers and put households at higher risk of fines for missed payments. Many cheaper food stores and even food banks don't carry culturally appropriate food, and some migrants have to travel further afield to find this. Many of the migrants in our research were trying to lower costs by either going without food for adults or rationing heating and hot water. For some, this was impacting negatively on their physical and mental health, causing issues with damp in their homes, and parents were particularly concerned about the impact on their children. Almost everyone we spoke with saw increasing household earnings as the best way for migrants to lift themselves away from poverty or the risk of poverty. Yet migrants also face some specific barriers when it comes to employment. Those who've not arrived on skilled worker visas with a direct link to better paid employment often end up in jobs which don't match their skills, qualifications, and experience, and find themselves stuck in a familiar cycle of low-paid jobs and insecure employment. Getting overseas qualifications recognised can be difficult and costly, and there's not always clear guidance available as to what is needed. Hope's example on the slide shows the considerable costs, £1,500 in this case, involved in getting medical qualifications converted and proving the required level of language proficiency. Where people are working long hours for little pay and struggling to meet bills, finding additional time and resource to attend language classes, take top-up exams, or gain relevant experience through volunteering, for example, can be simply impossible. We know that work and recruitment practices in Scotland are not immune to discrimination on grounds of race, ethnicity, and religion, and several of our participants spoke of being passed over for jobs or promotions in ways which they believed to be discriminatory. For some groups of migrants, mostly international students, visa conditions restrict the number of hours they can work to 20 hours per week. Those on health and care visas also are allowed to top up incomes from their primary employer by taking on additional work, but only in other health or social care jobs and only for up to 20 hours a week. Lots of international students in our research talked about the great difficulties they'd found in accessing work that would give them those 20 hours and pay them at a rate that was livable, especially where they had family to support. Again, people were doing their very best to manage in any way possible, and most often by taking on extra work, working multiple shifts and juggling these with home and family life. This puts a sometimes unbearable strain on people's physical and mental health and on family relationships, both between partners and between parents and children. A third strand in Scottish approaches to poverty reduction, alongside reducing costs and increasing incomes through employment, is improving access to incomes and support through social security. For many migrants, this pathway is severely restricted because of NRPF, or no recourse to public funds. This is a condition associated with most visas granting people the right to live and work in the UK. 2.6 million people in the UK are subject to an NRPF condition. Of course, these are not all people in situations where they need public funds. Some skilled workers, for example, have much higher incomes, nor are all of those on lower incomes at the very sharp end of the wedge where they're experiencing destitution. But for the large group of migrants working in low to medium income jobs, it removes the safety nets that other lower income households might rely on, including access to in-work benefits, to local authority housing, to child benefit, and so on. Any breach of these rules can result in visas being revoked and being required to leave the UK. That said, NRPF does not apply to all migrants, nor to all types of assistance. The largest group of migrants in Scotland who do have access to public funds are EU citizens, those with settled or pre-settled status. However, some of those with pre-settled status are still excluded from accessing welfare if they're unable to demonstrate what's called a right to reside. And EU citizens who arrived with a visa after December 2021 will likely be subject to no recourse to public funds. The NRPF condition can also be lifted for other groups of migrants, for example, where a child is experiencing or at risk of destitution. However, this is a difficult process requiring lots of paperwork, and people are often scared about how making an application might impact on their migrant status. From the other end of the issue, not all forms of public support or assistance are on the long but specific list of publicly funded benefits from which those with NRPF are excluded. So, for example, accessing services which are themselves publicly funded, be that employability support, English language classes, or food banks, isn't part of the restriction. And the Scottish Government and Scottish local authorities do also have powers which allow them to make some additional benefits and entitlements available. They've used these already in some limited ways, for example, by making Best Start foods, but not Best Start grants, available to people with no recourse to public funds, and some other benefits, such as school uniform grants and free school meals for older children, are available at the discretion of local authorities. The complexity around knowing who is or is not subject to NRPF, exactly which forms of support and assistance it applies to, and the fear people have both as claimants and as advisors of getting this wrong means that even when they are eligible for support, people can miss out. In the example on the slide, we see that when Agnieszka was expecting a baby and she and her husband were in quite a desperate situation, they even feared to use a food bank in case it might violate their NRPF condition and jeopardize their visas. This was not actually the case. All food banks are accessible to people with NRPF, but the fear was genuine and the impact of that fear quite severe. Beyond Social Security, we found a lot of evidence of financial exclusion, meaning people couldn't access affordable credit or were excluded from certain schemes, for example, direct debit payments, that could have helped to reduce costs and avoid difficulties with late payments and fines incurred for those. Some of this is caused by hard exclusions when people's lack of credit history, their length of residence at a UK address, or their irregular incomes make it difficult to access a full range of UK banking services and direct debit schemes. But migrants also experience more informal exclusions through difficulties understanding and navigating complicated financial systems due to language barriers, lack of information, and digital exclusion. Finally, we found that migrants encounter a divided landscape of provision when they seek to access support and services that might help them to maximize incomes, navigate systems, or increase their employability. On one side are specialist migrant-focused charities and organizations, most of them with precarious funding and limited reach into publicly funded or mainstream programs. On the other are a mix of public and third sector organizations providing employability and income maximization services, but with varied experience of supporting migrants, and often with limited awareness of the specific barriers that migrants face, and lacking confidence in intercultural communication. There can be an assumption that access to support when needed will come through contact with migrant communities, signposting people to migrant organizations, and from there to mainstream services. But in actual fact, these linkages are very unevenly accessible depending on who and where you are. And even if it works, this is a long, drawn out and tiring route to help. It's hardly a no wrong door approach to the provision of support. In fact, the result is more often one where every door is wrong and migrants are passed back and forth between service providers or given incomplete and inaccurate advice. Our analysis of the insight we've gathered leads us to a suite of recommendations for Scottish and local governments, for support services and for employers. You can read the detail of these in our policy brief, which we're publishing today alongside our report. They centre on improving connectivity through improved systems for data sharing and referrals, increasing inclusion through better consideration of migrants' needs, whether as service users or as employees, and more clarity through clearer guidance on entitlements and increased support through extending the range of accessible benefits in Scotland. We're not stopping there though, and the coming year is going to be all about a process to turn ideas and recommendations into change. So the last, but perhaps the most important thing that we're launching today is our policy laboratory. This aims to drive change in policy making and practice through the co-development of feasible, fundable and effective solutions to some of the problems that we've noted and highlighted. We're actively seeking participation from local and national government, public and third sector support organisations, employers and service users. And we'll be focusing on two key areas for change. Firstly, to develop more joined up services and a no wrong door approach for migrants. And secondly, to increase access to person-centred support and improving the intercultural communication skills in Scotland's support landscape. Together, these feed into our last area for change, which is the development of a dynamic ecosystem of support for migrants. But this is a longer-term vision, a vision of support that meets the needs of diverse and changing populations in sometimes very different places across Scotland. And it's one that probably requires more than a year to achieve. The Policy Lab itself will have two main phases. The first, a discovery phase, runs from today to the end of this calendar year, and will focus firstly on pulling together a learning resource based on existing tools and initiatives related to each of our key themes, and secondly on bringing on board the right range of participants to take this forward into the delivery phase. The delivery phase, which will run between January and June next year, will start with 2 online events, one per theme in January and February, and each will bring together a group of 10 to 15 participants who are prepared to become involved in a 6-month design process. Each event will set out the problem and propose ideas for how to solve it. Participants will discuss these ideas and negotiate a path forward, surfacing clear steps, identifying people to take action forward, and developing defined timescales. Over the months that follow, MPS staff will support the group to develop co-designed outputs such as toolkits, guidance for data sharing or monitoring, directories, or training offerings. So to conclude, we're really eager to receive suggestions or conversation partners for our discovery phase and participants for the design phase of our policy lab. What's most important here is that we bring together people who have access to the levers of power, responsibility, and resource to make change happen. So we're especially looking for participants who have access to or know a lot about the structures, initiatives, and funding mechanisms which could feed this process to build ideas into possibilities and advocate for change. So like it says on the slide, if that sounds like you or someone you know, please get in touch. And I'll finish there and hand back to Sarah to introduce the following speakers.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm aware that a number of you will have joined us a little bit late, but I hope you've caught a lot of Rebecca's presentation on the report we're launching today about financial disadvantages in migrant households in Scotland. That report is available on our website. And as I said, it covers a sizable piece of research delivered together with partners in organisations that provide advice and other types of frontline services across Scotland. For the rest of the event today, we will have 2 of the people in that partnership provide some reflections on their experience of doing that work and how it links to their own work, as well as some commentary from Professor John McKendrick, and then time for questions, for Q&A, comments, and so on. So first off, I want to ask Maria Jose Pavez to comment from Grampian Regional Equality Council for her reflections on GREC's involvement in this project.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Just if anyone's not muted, just a reminder to mute yourself so we don't get the echo back. And well, again, to start, my name is Maria Jose Pavez. I'm Grampian Regional Equality Council Scott General Manager and Policy Officer. And together with my colleague Michelle Haywood, we supported this research and the field work for it. Now, I'm going to briefly share a bit of our work at GREC, how this research on financial disadvantage for migrant households reflects what people we work with experience on a daily basis, and how it also provides strong evidence and clear recommendations to address the current gaps in support for migrant communities. So GREC is a charity based in Aberdeen and advancing equality across the northeast of Scotland. We work to tackle prejudice and discrimination, celebrate diversity, build positive community relations, and provide evidence to change policy and practice. And we have been working in the Northeast since 1984. Actually, this past weekend, we just marked our 40th anniversary with a special event. We have historically worked with a focus on tackling inequalities affecting ethnic minority communities, but since 2011, we have an intersectional approach as well, and we cover all protected characteristics. We offer a series of services and projects, but today I'm going to highlight only a few of them relevant to consider for this research, starting with our casework service, which is one-to-one support for anyone that has experienced prejudice or discrimination. And this is with a broad understanding of systemic barriers and discrimination, not only limited to overt prejudice and discrimination. As part of this service, we have a financial inclusion officer who is very much focused on better informing people of their rights and supporting access to entitlements to prevent hardship. And as a complement to casework, we also offer a counseling service to anyone that has also experienced prejudice or discrimination. And for both casework and counseling, we are lucky enough to also provide an interpreting and translation service, Intrans, which allows us to offer free of cost interpreters to anyone accessing our services with a language barrier. We also have a language cafe project, which is a weekly safe space where people can practice their English in a more informal setting and with other English learners. And every week we have from 60 to 80 people attending this project, which also enables participants to meet and connect with others, learn about services and support across Aberdeen City and the Northeast. GREC also works in partnership, and we co-facilitate the No Recourse Notice Partnership, which was founded in 2014 to ensure that people impacted by the NRPF condition from ethnic minority communities are aware of their rights and receive appropriate and good quality advice to prevent destitution and homelessness. Across all of these projects and partnerships, we work with people from ethnic minority communities, and many of them are migrants. We therefore have a strong understanding of the equality issues, the systemic issues affecting people. This includes the struggles to cover high visa costs and health surcharges, the issues with accessing employment that matches people's skill set and professional experience, the housing costs when you don't have a financial record in the country, and the food costs when you're caught up in the middle of a cost of living crisis with no secure employment or support network, the impact of a language barrier and the very limited affordable provision to improve or prove your English level, the lack of support if you have NRPF, or the general perception there is no support available as people didn't have access to timely and accurate information. I've experienced some of these challenges myself as a migrant, and at GREC we hear this daily from clients and community members working with us. We also know that the alternatives to seek and find adapted support and accurate information for people are quite limited, and they need to be improved across both public and third sector. Now, key to put this knowledge to good use and harness community voices, we also have a wide-ranging policy and research project to present this evidence base to decision makers at a local and national level to enable positive change. And it is here where the research with Migration Policy Scotland and the other partner organizations came at a key moment, as it enabled us to address a gap in research and evidence. This is because it really focused on better understanding financial disadvantage for migrant households instead of utilizing a broader focus on ethnic minority communities, where the body of evidence in the matter is much more developed. This research therefore enabled our caseworkers to reflect on patterns and share this information in relation to migrants with MPS, and we also provided a safe space for community members and clients to engage in focus groups and interviews to provide additional information on their experiences for this research. And just to highlight, many times language is considered as the main barrier to access better jobs and therefore prevent poverty. But all the focus groups and interviews we had in Aberdeen were actually in English, and we didn't require interpreting support. But the patterns and the barriers were very much the same as in other groups that took part in the research. So this highlights these are systemic barriers. And these systemic barriers are consolidated and presented in the Open the Door report, with an overview of the current situation across all of Scotland as well. Now, as Rebecca's mentioned, the next step in terms of the policy laboratory will be key so we can continue to reflect on the recommendations of the report and how to implement improvements so they are as impactful as possible. A recent example of a positive change highlighted in the report is the change in access to best start foods for those with NRPF condition. But from the report, we also know that clear guidelines and communication, both for communities and frontline staff, are key to make support accessible. And as at GREC and my colleagues from the No Recourse Northeast Partnership have reached out recently to Social Security Scotland about best start foods, and because we had a few queries, but received quite mixed messages and information about it. So this again highlights the need to have information available for frontline staff and for communities to make this support in effect available and accessible. Lastly, the report clearly outlines barriers and that we have to do better in terms of supporting migrants to settle and thrive. Now, this is because First and foremost, this is a matter of human rights, equality, and we take pride in being a diverse country. But there's also a very clear and unavoidable economic and demographic argument to make Scotland more welcoming for all migrants. And decision makers, the public sector, and the third sector, we all need to reflect on this and work together on improvements. So the invitation is there again. Reach out to Rebecca if you want to learn more about the upcoming policy laboratories, and also happy to answer any questions that you may have in terms of the research in Aberdeen and the role that we had on this when we reach out the Q&A section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. Before a comment on the partner reflections, I want to also invite Delia Spatareanu from Community Renewal Rom Romeha to reflect on her organization's experience of working with us on this project and on how this project relates to her organization's broader work.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. So my name is Delia Spatareanu, and I'm a community researcher at Community Renewal. So together with my colleagues Marek Baloch and Leon Pushka, we have been part of the research here in Govan Hill, south of Glasgow. So Community Renewal mainly works with Roma migrants in Govan Hill in south of Glasgow, and we have a Rom Romeha, which means by Roma for Roma ethos. So we're very much centered around building capacity for the Roma community here to have their voices heard. And we have a Rom Romeha community forum, and also we make a point of employing a majority of our staff from the local Roma community. So our work is a lot around making sure that the marginalized voices of Roma are heard and represented and amplified, especially when we're talking about poverty and potentially exploitative work situations. So this is particularly relevant to the Roma people who have chosen Glasgow as their home and have moved here. Specifically, when they first arrive, people are in need of immediate accommodation and finding a source of income. So they are forced into taking exploitative jobs and settling for housing situations that are not adequate to their needs. So as an organization, we were very eager to be part of this research because we wanted to include these migrant experiences and their voices, and also to ensure that the challenges that the Roma people face, which are similar to the majority of the other migrant challenges, are acknowledged and addressed throughout Scotland. So for us, a significant achievement was to see the level of trust we have built with the Roma community. During the research, we found that they were quite comfortable and found a safe space to share their stories with us. And for us, this is a big achievement because, as we know, historically in wider Europe, the Roma community has been somewhat hesitant in providing information about themselves. And just earning the trust has meant a lot for us. So we felt that we were in a we were quite well positioned to be part of this research. And to bring the voices of this community. It also allowed us, being part of the research, to have an opportunity to reflect on the services we already provide, specifically the employability service and the welfare advice service, and how we can make this more relevant for our clients, and also looking forward in how we might prepare more community researchers from the Roma community that can become more empowered and be more in contact with the community here. So this is something also that we're looking into doing and have started. So we're learning through the process as well. Okay. So we found, so just want to talk a little bit about the two branches that we have, the welfare team and the employability team, and because they have a critical role in stabilizing people's lives when they arrive here, and also to help them access benefits and increase their household earnings and make sure that Roma people are well informed on their rights upon arriving. So we are at the moment trying to incorporate a more cohesive workflow between the welfare advice team, which has been over the years really key to this, and now the employability team to come in and make sure that people have opportunities to get into better work, which is very important for us. So not just work, but better paid work, because as we know, they're facing the same issues of working low-paid jobs for very long hours and struggling to make ends meet and to have really good quality lives. So we found that actually the findings from the report are echoing a lot of the things that we hear on a daily basis here. The higher cost of living, exploitative landlords, and we are looking into how we might secure better housing and protect people from rogue landlords. We're trying to join up closely with Govan Hill Roma Law Center, Positive Action in Housing and Living Rent. This is specifically looking at housing and health, because we also have the Glasgow effect, and we have some research showing that Roma people have a lower life expectancy. So we're particularly interested in supporting more advocacy around better housing. And also to shorten the cycle of referrals that people can get stuck into, and make sure that we can. I mean, we already your recommendations were a more person-centered approach, and we're already doing that here, because the staff that works here works in the community and know many of the families that come here personally. So that it is very good for us to make sure that people are not being passed around too much between organizations, and that we are dealing with as much as we can here in-house. Also, what helps for that is that our staff, being from the local community, they speak the relevant languages, which has built our trust enormously in the community, because majority of staff can speak Romanes, which is the official Roma language, as well as Romanian, Slovak, Polish, which are the main local languages. So this has helped us and made us quite unique here, because we can skip one level of interpretation, and people feel that they can trust us better with their information. And another thing that we're very keen to have the research as part of is the Roma.Scot project, which is something that we are going to launch in the future, which is an online platform. And that's not specifically for the Roma community, but mainly for others in Scotland, in the UK and Europe that would like to understand more about the challenges and successes of Roma people that have chosen to live in Scotland. So it will be a showcase of personal stories, key findings, and reports. So for us, it's very important to have data that acknowledges Roma as part of the migrants in Scotland, and also is very supportive for us to secure more funding, because we still run as a charity. And at the moment, our services are covered about 40% from Glasgow City Council. So this is absolutely vital for us to back up our services and keep advocating. So we'll be including the report in that. And I think that's my time up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Delia. Thank you so much, Delia. I think one of the most successful parts of this project as a partnership has been the collaboration across insight and practice, and how that's enabled us to, we've had your input as partners to help refine the research tools to make sure that we're focusing on the right issues, to create a level of reach and spread in terms of whom we could contact, how quickly. So we've been able to together achieve so much more in so much quicker a time than we certainly could have done on our own. So we're very grateful. We found that incredibly helpful. And I'm really looking forward to having the next stage of this project go together as well, and to work out ways in which a collaboration strengthens all of us by working together. But next, I want to introduce Professor John McKendrick, who is Professor of Social Justice and co-director of the Scottish Poverty and Inequality Research Unit at Glasgow Caledonian University, and he's going to give some of his reflections on the research and how that fits into his broader area of expertise and knowledge.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and many thanks everybody for allowing me the opportunity to share a few words. I'll maybe say a little bit to begin with about the broader agenda in Scotland, and then 7 reflections and what I've heard this afternoon from our 3 speakers. First of all, in terms of the big picture, it was mentioned it's Challenge Poverty Week. You might have picked up in the papers, 1 million Scots living in poverty was the headline on Monday, almost 250,000 children living in Scotland. So we know this is a bigger issue in Scotland, the issue of poverty. More positively, it's been a national ambition for some time to do something about this. In fact, every iteration of the Scottish Government, previously the Scottish Executive, has had a poverty focus. So it's not that we're ignorant of the problem, it's not that we don't do anything about it, it's just that we're not doing enough and we're perhaps not doing the right things. But there is that ambition, and there is that ambition particularly for children. That in 2017 we came to the collective agreement with cross-party support that by 2030 we would have eradicated child poverty in Scotland. And with the election in the UK of the UK government, they have indicated then, although we can certainly be critical of some of the early decisions not to invest in our very poorest communities and our poorest populations, they have indicated they want to look more systematically what has to be done to tackle that issue of poverty. And while children is often the focus, what we often find is that children are the focus and a gateway to tackling poverty more broadly amongst communities with disadvantage. This afternoon there was a report launched in England that pointed out that 13% of local authorities in England have a broader approach to tackling poverty, that's whole population and not just based in children. I think it was Rebecca that mentioned that the way that we try to tackle child poverty in Scotland has 3 pillars, and I think it's useful for us in thinking about what we can do to connect to those broader agendas in terms of supporting migrants. Would understand what these 3 pillars are to align to it: increasing income from employment, increasing income from benefits, and reducing the cost of living. And very much what we've heard then from Maria and Delia and from Rebecca has touched upon it, ways in which the issues we're grappling with and the responses to that are consistent with those broader strategies that we want to pursue in Scotland to tackle child poverty, but as I say, poverty more generally. But I've got 7, if you don't mind, 7 just reflections on what I've heard this afternoon. I'm very much looking forward to reading the report, but not had a chance to do so. But based on what I've heard this afternoon, I think there are 7 points I want to make those connections between that broader work that's going on in poverty and the work that will be going ahead, led by Migration Poverty Scotland, to take forward supporting the migrant community. First of all, it's very clear that what you're doing has a participative culture, the co-production, the plans that lie ahead then for the way in which we're going to reach effective, I think what were the words that were used, I think it was a lovely turn of phrase, feasible, fundable and effective solutions. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that that is the approach that's been pursued more generally in Scotland. The idea of co-production is at the heart of the Poverty and Inequality Commission. They have a lived experience group, and each of Scotland's 32 local authorities are strongly encouraged to have lived experience at the heart of their local strategies to tackle child poverty. So again, the way in which you're approaching it is very much of the moment, as what we expect as being standard practice rather than exceptional practice in Scotland. A second point, well, migrants are concentrated in particular parts of the country, and that's the same with poverty. Poverty is more prevalent in urban Scotland. I think what we've heard this afternoon, certainly from GREC in Grampian to begin with then, is that migrant poverty is prevalent in all parts of Scotland. And that presents particular challenges. I mean, I think as Delia would have pointed out, the concentration of Roma in Govan Hill allows the opportunity then for services to be delivered that are bespoke to that community. It's a different type of challenge and a different type of scale when migrants are more scattered. And And we can think of more rural communities where migrant populations are making important economic contributions, but perhaps don't have those larger communities of support round about them. And again, that's the same in the broader approaches to tackling poverty. We must, and we do, acknowledge that the urban strategies must be different to rural strategies. And it is good to see that acknowledgement with the migrant community too. I think a third point I thought, again, something I hadn't thought of before, was that the no recourse to public funds gives a mechanism then for providing services to children. You know, that although there might not be the recourse to public funds, local authorities, and I think it was Rebecca that had made the point, that this can be a mechanism through which, if children are in destitution, it can unlock that support that otherwise not be the case. And of course, and again, as mentioned, I think Maria had pointed out some of the challenges, is that minority ethnic is one of the 6 priority groups for tackling poverty. Now, well, as Maria had pointed out, that's not the same as migrant communities. I think, again, it's a connection. It's a way in to say that this is central to the agenda that Scotland wants to pursue to tackle poverty, is acknowledging the particular challenges that are felt by particular minority ethnic groups. And I think having a migrant perspective in that would be welcome as part of a consistent approach to tackling poverty. I think a fourth point, and it's not a good news story, is that local budgets are under stress. That will be of no surprise to anybody. But you know, when we have these asks, these feasible, fundable, and effective solutions, then we are asking that ask at a very difficult time. Funds have been retracted. You know, it's a case of pulling back from funds. And that's not a reason for not asking, but it's a case of, you know, thinking through how, when we ask for funds, we can do so in a way it's more likely to be funded, taking acknowledgement of these wider stresses that local authorities face. And of course, those local authority funding pressures trickle down onto the third sector organisations to support. A fifth point, you know, the role of the state and the complexity of the support landscape. I think it was in one of Rebecca's earlier slides. Again, I think it's important to acknowledge that complexity that's out there of who we go to find support, and this will be my final point as well, is there's a lot of commonalities out there. I mean, that complexity is experienced not just by migrants, it's also experienced by people experiencing poverty more generally. I'll come back to that in my final point, that more general point, but that complex landscape is something that, again, we're acknowledging that we have to do more about. The work-based solutions, I think it's really important that you acknowledge that migrants themselves are saying this is the main way in which they want to tackle the difficult financial circumstances they face, is by having a greater reward from work, work paying, if you like, and work not leading to a life in poverty, but a life beyond poverty. And I think what's really important to acknowledge there is we're now moving into the third phase of the child poverty delivery strategy, and work-based solutions will be much more prominent than they have been in the first 2 strategies. It's not that they've not been there, but some of the actions in the early strategies were more about getting the basic support in place, dealing with crisis, COVID-related crisis to some extent, but also thinking about the social security benefits that we've introduced to put money to the very poorest families. But I think increasingly there'll be a focus then on work-based solutions. So the fact that then that's what migrants are asking for, again, I think is consistent with what is going on in the broader tackling poverty landscape in Scotland at the current time. But the final bundle of points I've alluded to already was just the commonalities. There is so much that I heard this afternoon that it was a case of, yep, that's the experience of people experiencing poverty in Scotland. Yes, that's the experience. You know, the fear of presenting for support for those with no recourse to public funds is something I've heard about benefit claimants as well. They're worried to change their situation for fear of losing what they've got, even if it might lead to more resource coming in. The financial exclusions were referred to, both hard exclusions and difficulty navigating complex systems. Again, that's something that's shared more generally by many people experiencing poverty. The poverty premium of particular expenses exacerbating the condition of financial disadvantage people experience, again, is experienced by people experiencing poverty, particularly with regard to heating and payment systems. The no wrong door approach been something, and thinking about the 2 focuses for the policy groups, the no wrong door approach, very interesting. That's what the Glasgow City Council are trying to promote through its Glasgow Helps portal, trying to shift the way in which services are accessed, so that is a no wrong door approach, which is again consistent with what you're looking to achieve over the next year. And a person-centred approach as well is again very consistent with what the direction of travel is. Now, I draw these commonalities not to in any way, shape or form argue against the fact there are migrant-specific dimensions. I think it's really important that we do, and we draw attention to, as well as recognise these migrant-specific dimensions. But I also think there's opportunity and commonality. The challenges that migrants are enduring are challenges that other populations are also enduring in Scotland at the current time. And I think in that collective sense of, this is a problem that we share, it's a problem that we collectively have to address, there might be some mileage in that. So the kind of final observation I would make then is not just to go it alone in terms of addressing migrant poverty issues, but to connect to these allies that we'd have in the broader anti-poverty community in Scotland in trying to challenge some of these shared challenges. So many thanks for allowing me to share some thoughts, and I certainly wish you very well and happy to support you in any way I can if it helps.